So welcome to everybody. I'm extremely happy to open this webinar on the renewed partnership with the Southern Neighbourhood and the implication for Israel. My name is Dan Katarivas. I am the chairman of the Israeli EU Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which is actually the umbrella chamber of all the bilateral chambers of Israel with European, or actually European countries as part of the Union. We just actually suspended the British chamber, but we still have them as an observer. So, and we don't have all the chambers present in Israel, but most of the countries do have a representation. I think that we've been waiting for quite a while to see how the EU will actually renew its action in the region. The region is changing itself. I think that certainly in the last few months, Israel positioning in the region has gone through tremendous, I would say, changes. And I'm sure that the speaker that we have today will address that, because if we were, an island, we are now part of both the the Eastern Mediterranean, where things are happening there, and also I would say we are part of the Middle East with what's happening with the Abraham Accord. So I think the positioning of Israel is extremely interesting nowadays. We belong now to, and we are connected to things that were not there before. I think that Europe also has undergone changes. Well, the Brexit is certainly one, but the COVID is also something that has shaken things inside Europe. But I think that the Europeans are now putting their home back, the house back together, and this is interesting. And definitely the relation that with this region, which goes back many, many years ago. Just to mention the Barcelona, but even before the Barcelona process, I think that the vocation of Europe vis-a-vis the Mediterranean, or the Mare Nostrum, is something that definitely exists. So here now we have a new document, a new agenda that we would like to look into that. And for that reason, we brought several people, but we are actually having this webinar together with Mitvim, and in a minute, Nimrod Goren, the founder and the head of Mitvim, will address us, and with Mickey Drill, who is from the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung of Israel, and with also Maya Sion, who is now the chairman of the Israel Association for European Integration. So we have here, I would say, a partnership that can look at this process, and I hope that we will all leave this 1 hour and a half with a bit more information and more ideas how to carry both the partnership of Israel with the region, how to move the relation with Europe, and how to look at all this process in a very positive manner. So without further ado, Dr. Nimrod Goren, please, I pass you the microphone and for your opening remarks. Please, Nimrod.
Thank you, Danny. It's a pleasure to cooperate with all these institutions that you mentioned. We've been working together for quite some time, and having a chance for an opening chapter with the EU and its Southern Neighbourhood is a good opportunity to reconvene. And I thank you, all of the audience that joined us today. My name is Nimrod. I'm heading Mitvim. Mitvim is a foreign policy think tank based in Israel, celebrating its 10th anniversary this month, working to better integrate Israel into its surrounding regions, including the Mediterranean, Europe, and the Middle East, while working to advance Israeli-Palestinian peacemaking and improving Israel's foreign policy. And we have to remember that we are convening today at a very difficult day for Israeli-Palestinian relations, for Jewish-Arab relations here in Israel, in Jerusalem, maybe also in Gaza. And these are days that raise questions on which international actors can intervene, can moderate, can mediate, can help actors on the ground live in a better reality, in a more secure and safe environment. And when we are looking into the international community, definitely countries in Europe, the EU itself, countries in the Mediterranean, the Southern Neighbourhood, have been playing a role in the past in mediating Israeli-Palestinian relations, and perhaps could play a role now. But on the ground, you do not see that happening now. And the weakness of the EU and the region in intervening in Israeli-Palestinian affairs is evident. And therefore, today, when we are discussing what this renewed partnership could mean, I will also think about it in the prospects of contributing to peacemaking in our region and to regional stability. It's not only about what's happening today. We are also marking 1 year since the establishment of an Israeli government that will no longer perhaps be in existence in a couple of weeks from now. But one of the things that this government did manage to do is to change the tone from Israel towards Brussels. It was actually a role played by the foreign minister Ashkenazi, not by all government members, but it did create a better language, better atmosphere, better engagement on the political level, on the diplomatic level between Israel and Europe. It was also a year in which developments happened between Israel and the Southern Neighbourhood, whether it's the consolidation of the Eastern Mediterranean gas flow that transformed itself into an international institution, the linkages between the Gulf and the East Med and Europe, negotiations between Israel and Lebanon, which was just resumed recently, prospects of perhaps ambassadors going back to Tel Aviv and Ankara. So a lot of diplomatic development and engagement that are happening and are setting the tone for perhaps a new chapter with new government in place in Israel, with a new foreign minister perhaps, with a new Israeli ambassador to Brussels coming up soon, with a new European ambassador to Israel in September, with a new EU special representative to the peace process, and with a new paper by the EU about how to engage with the Southern Neighbourhood. So we're excited to learn what does that all mean for Israel, what new opportunities it opens up, how could we best leverage the changing regional landscape, the changing political landscape, in order to utilize these new policies coming from Brussels towards a better region for Israel, for its neighbors, and for the people of Europe. So thank you all again, and I'm giving the mic back to you, Danny.
Thank you, Nimrod. I think, yes, I mean, today is a difficult day. I haven't listened to the news all day, but I hope that things will calm down. But we are all definitely watching what's happening in Jerusalem, hopefully not having repercussions which are beyond or too important, but we'll see that by this evening or tomorrow. Our next speaker will be Mickey Drill from the Fried Eber Stiftung. Please, Mickey, the mic is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome to everybody. As some of you may know, FS Israel is actively engaged in advancing Israeli-European relations and promote regular policy dialogues between the EU and Israel. From our point of view, one of the strategic targets of the FS work in Israel is strengthening Israeli-European alliances and disseminating information about the EU in Israel and vice versa. This is very important since Israeli-European relations are complex and ambivalent. What we try to do is introducing European viewpoints into the Israeli discourse and Israeli viewpoints into the European one. We facilitate exchanges of decision makers and experts. We do so in cooperation with our partners like the Israeli Association for the Study of European Integration, represented here by its co-president, Dr. Maya Zion Tzidkiyahu, and Mitvim, the Israeli Institute for Regional Foreign Policies, represented here by its head and founder, Dr. Nimrod Goren. At this occasion, I would like to thank both of you, Maya and Nimrod, for our strong and long-lasting cooperation. I would also like to emphasize our good cooperation with Dani Katarivas for the past 2 decades. Dani, I'm glad that we partner this event with the EU-Israeli Chamber of Commerce. Usually, in normal times, I mean before Corona, we hold events like this one at leading universities and academic colleges in Israel with the aim to bring distinguished lecturer guests from abroad and assemble discussion panels around the guests with leading Israeli lecturers and prominent figures specialized in European affairs. Now we are forced to do so by Zoom, which also has its advantages, like assembling people from all over the world. I'm really happy that we do have so many participants from so many institutions and countries with us today. Without any doubt, this fact is also due to the important and interesting topic we are discussing today, and due to all the distinguished speakers. So thank you everybody, Michele, Luigi, and Noah for being with us. We all are looking forward to listen to your contributions, and I wish us all an exciting and fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mickey. So actually, let me explain to you how things are going to be conducted. We have four distinguished speakers. Each of them will actually have 8 minutes to actually tell about his view of this new Southern Neighbourhood and its implications for Israel. After each of those speakers will make his presentation, we obviously will open it to question and answer. You all know, I presume by now, that you have down the way of chat of actually putting a question, and actually we will try also, if you put your question, to identify you among the gallery and to let you even ask the question directly without actually reading it. So we'll see how it will manage. So please don't hesitate to ask all the questions and the most pertinent one. And again, we are recording this meeting, so I hope there is no problem. If someone doesn't want to be recorded, just let us know in advance so we can actually shut down the recording. But I think that we are not, I hope that everybody is okay with the recording. So I'm just saying that. And obviously, I think that we can now start by having our first speaker with Michele Melroni, who is a policy officer of relation with Israel at the European External Action Service. So, Michele, the floor is yours. Please, 8 minutes, and I'll tell you a minute before the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Katarivas. Thank you, everyone, for inviting me, for being here. So let me start joining the wish that the situation in Jerusalem diffuses soon, and that these clashes come to an end very soon. I have prepared a sort of a, let's say, very rough presentation, or just a list of bullet points for you just to accompany me through my intervention, which will last, I hope, less than 8 minutes. I think that the question and answer part will be very interesting. So I am now trying to share my screen. So first, I think it's important to set a little bit the stage for of the position of Israel and Israel-EU cooperation in the South Mediterranean. So you all know that there is a strong technical and economic cooperation between Israel and the EU. EU is the first trade partner of Israel, Israel the second or third trade partner of EU. And I think that if we count investment, it goes to position number one. But Israel is already engaged in regional programs. So as far as EU cooperation in the South Med is concerned, Israel is not, say, insulated, but it already participates in some regional programs on climate, on environment, on transport. And if we talk trade again, this year, at the end of this year, we should see the implementation of the new rules of the Pan-Euro-Mediterranean rules of origin. This is just an example of an initiative, and rules of origin are very important for trade. That would, let's say, help the further integration of Israel and the entire South Med region, regional integration, intra-regional integration, and integration with the EU. So these new rules should come into force at the end of the year, at least for the countries that will complete the procedure for adoption. Then also a quick reference to this new partnership. Why now? We are 25 years from the Barcelona process, from the declaration. We're not all of this declaration. I mean, we have not lived up to all the expectations. We are still a problem in the area, in the region, with even conflicts, and economic development is not the same everywhere. Israel, as Israel economy has developed very well, but this the same cannot be said for all the economies in the region, and that we are faced with the huge challenges. I mean, climate change, COVID-19. I think we all know how difficult those challenges are to face. The objectives of the new agenda, I would focus I would like to bring your attention to green and digital transition that are really at the core of the overall strategy of the Commission for the next years, and also the will to use all EU, all the tools that are at disposal of the EU, and at disposal of member states to support cooperation with the partners in the South Mediterranean. So there is this intention to use all that it is at disposal and new instruments in a more strategic way, in a more comprehensive way. And member states are, and there is a stronger coordination between the EU and member states in the programming phase, and there will be a stronger coordination in the implementation phase. Sorry, yeah. So the main themes, voila. So the main themes are 5, and it's a broad agenda. It's broader from the last document on the region, which was the European Neighbourhood Policy Review of 2015. We have added a focus on digital and green transition. We are added human development as a driver for change. We have added peace and security because of the importance of peace and peace building for development. So we're trying to consider all the development in the region and also in the EU that took place in the last years, and that would be significant in the coming years. So as you know, this agenda comes together, is accompanied by an economic and investment plan, which includes a series of actions that would help drive a sustainable and inclusive economy for everyone. So there are flagship initiatives, 12 flagship initiatives that are mentioned, but they are indication. They are they're not prejudging the ongoing programming process. So there are ideas for discussion with our partners. Israel is also mentioned actively under flagship 7 on digital transformation, research and innovation, because of the great added value of Israel in those sectors. And in this document, we mention very clearly that the EU is ready to explore further regional, sub-regional, or trilateral cooperation and joint initiatives, also in the light of the normalization of relations between Israel and certain Arab countries. So this is this agenda gives also kind of political support and to the engagement in the normalization process. This is the last page of my presentation. In the coming months, we will have the approval of the main financing instrument. It's called NDC, which stands for Neighborhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument, and we will have the adoption of multi-annual programming. So the main programming document of the European Union for the action in the region for the next 7 years, from 2021 to 2027. What does it mean in practice? That this is the time to exchange ideas. It's a reflection time, how we can operationalize this normalization process, how the EU can support the process, where Israel can bring and get added value. So not only in economic terms, of course, but also in political terms. For example, we attach a lot of importance to people-to-people initiatives that bring together municipalities, SMEs, schools, universities, associations, various associations, etc., etc. Which areas are most relevant? Could be climate change, could be digitalization, could be education skills. Climate change, of course, is very important element in a region, the Middle East, where which is warming, I think, 20% faster than other regions in the world. So it's also the time to come with initiatives. For example, let me mention an initiative that the EU delegation in Tel Aviv is now bringing forward together with the Paris Center. So it's a series of online workshops on different themes, on desertification, on renewable energy, on climate change, on water desalination. And here we have the participation of experts from Israel, but also from the UAE, from Egypt, from Morocco, from the Palestinian territory, etc. So it's already an example of what we can do to support this process. And I will stop here, and I'll be very interested in knowing more of how do you see this going on, because this is the time. This is the time to come with ideas, and we are looking for that in Brussels.
Well, Michael, thank you very much. You made it 8 minutes to the exactly, so that's okay. And now our next speaker is going to be Dr. Luigi Scarvieri. He's a researcher fellow at the Center for European Reform. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you very much for your introduction, and thank you for inviting me to this very timely event. So I'm going to start by just discussing my view on the renewed partnership, and then briefly talk about what I think the implications for Israel are. Now, there are, I think, some new elements in the partnership, as has been mentioned, compared to previous EU policies towards the MENA region. Most prominently, there is this effort to broaden the EU's agenda with greater prominence given for the first time to green issues, to digital issues, which of course reflects the importance of these topics in Europe itself, and greater emphasis to youth, women, and a people-centered agenda, including human rights, the rule of law. The partnership, similar to previous EU documents, draws a link between democracy and the EU funding and the degree of EU support, saying that there will be more assistance to countries that respect democracy and the rule of law. And to back up all these goals, there's a 7 billion envelope for 7 years, which should be, in theory, leveraged into 30 billion, although not always fully clear how this might be done. But on the whole, I did have quite a strong sense of déjà vu when reading the document. Perhaps the partnership didn't quite fully engage, I think, with some of the flaws of the issues in EU policies towards the region in the past, and perhaps why EU policies have not always been as successful as they might have. And to be specific, I think the EU's trade offer has not really changed. There is some talk of fostering regulatory alignment. There is the wish to reduce non-tariff barriers, the mentioned new rules of origin framework. But I think the reality remains that, on the whole, the offer market access on agriculture is relatively limited. For free trade with Morocco and Tunisia are stuck. Partly because arguably these agreements are a bit too ambitious, and you might need something more gradual and incremental. And this question is also connected to the broader question, I think, of whether what the EU is offering is really enough to incentivize partners to undertake the reforms that they need to undertake to attract investment and to grow. I also think that the EU will continue to struggle with the security-democracy dilemma. Again, this is, as I mentioned, not new. The EU has always emphasized democratic conditionalities, less in the 2015 iteration of the policy than in the 2011 one, but nonetheless, perhaps not lived up to it in practice. I'm thinking of, for example, large scale support to Egypt, despite that country doing very little in terms of improving its democracy. And more broadly, I think there's the issue that the European model is perhaps becoming less attractive in the region and less visible because there are alternatives. China and Russia are growing more and more influential, and the Gulf model has always been there. But on the whole, I actually doubt that democracy promotion will be such a priority for the EU. the priorities, in my view, will continue to be underneath the surface, those of cooperating in the management of migration, cooperating in reducing the risk of terrorism and fostering stability. But I think perhaps where the partnership is weakest is, and has the least to say, is in the field of security. The EU has, in recent years, been uninfluential, I could say. Maybe that's a bit mean, but not very influential in its efforts to resolve regional conflicts, whether we think of Syria, Libya, Iraq, or Yemen. And member states have often been divided, for example, also in the way they viewed Turkey's assertive foreign policy in the Eastern Mediterranean. And the renewed partnership does say that the EU wants to play a bigger role in these in conflict resolution, but it acknowledges that ultimately this depends on whether member states are on the same page, are united, are behind this agenda. And I think there are two issues. Yes, one of them being divisions between member states, which often hinder the EU's action, and the second is a broader unwillingness, perhaps, to take on hard matters or hard security challenges, and to think strategically about these matters. And I think in general the EU is perhaps going to be focused more on internal matters in the next couple of years, with the external agenda not having as much prominence as we might like it to have. And in particular, the EU will be focused on ensuring that the recovery from the COVID pandemic is as even as possible across all member states. Now, turning just quite quickly to the implications for Israel, my view is that the renewed partnership doesn't herald any major changes in EU policy. European companies, governments, the EU itself will, of course, as we've heard, continue to work with Israel, find ways to work with Israel to develop and deepen their research links, their economic links, their societal links, and there's probably more potential, most potential perhaps, to cooperate in the green and digital fields. And Israel will also continue, I'm sure, to work together with many member states. In particular, I'm thinking about Greece and Cyprus in terms of security. There might not be so much cooperation on other issues. I'm thinking, for example, of the Iran potential revival of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And of course, the EU will welcome, as it has, greater cooperation between Israel and Arab states and greater links in the framework of the Abraham Accords, and if they may be expanded, better so. At the same time, of course, the EU will continue to try to advance, or rather perhaps preserve, the possibility of a two-state solution. The renewed partnership document explicitly states that the EU wants to re-engage to reach a settlement. In practice, I think this will amount to two things. One of them, trying to foster greater democracy and accountability in the PA. And secondly, I think member states might be willing to take another look at the differentiation agenda in response to Israeli settlement building. The legal framework is already in place to differentiate between entities in Israel and the West Bank and East Jerusalem, but it's not being fully implemented. So there might be gradual moves in that direction. And I think the EU might also gradually put more pressure on Israel to ease restrictions on movement in the West Bank and on access in Gaza. But to conclude, I think having said all that, it's not really, at least my view is that it's not going to be a real priority for the EU. The EU won't be, I think, particularly vigorous on this dossier, in part because of the internal divisions of which we are all very aware of. But the issue does matter to Europe. And I think, the broader question perhaps standing behind the theme of this panel is if over time member states become, more and more member states become convinced that actually what you have is the emergence of a one-state reality, then there will be a shift, which will be very slow, but I think it will undoubtedly then affect those prospects for closer EU-Israel cooperation that we have been talking about. And I'll end there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Luigi. So we heard the European External Service and some remarks from a European researcher. And now we're turning to the Israeli side. And actually, I'm happy to invite Noah Genosar, who is a counselor at our mission in Brussels, in the multilateral human rights development and EU internal affairs specialist. So, Noah, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone, and thank you to the organizers for putting this event together. It's a pleasure to be joining you here today, and also to get another piece of evidence that there's more than a few people who are interested in this topic. Sometimes when you're dealing with it on a day-to-day basis, you feel like you're the only one who notices all these papers coming out of Brussels. So it's always nice to see that this is these are developments that are of interest and that are being followed by all those who are in fact affected by them. And I say affected because I think that the renewed approach to the Southern Neighbourhood is a very important development in the way that the European Union views its immediate neighbourhood, and one that it worked quite extensively on in partnership with its neighbourhood. And Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi also participated in discussions that the Commission, Commissioner Varhelyi of the Neighbourhood, and High Representative Borrell conducted with the Southern Neighbourhood countries in order to better understand what their priorities and what their challenges are when drafting and putting together this this joint communication and renewed approach to the neighbourhood. And really what came through these discussions in a very clear way is, I think, a lesson that we've all learned in the past year, even without the Southern Neighbourhood angle. And that really is the porous nature of our borders. This is something that the COVID-19 pandemic has made quite evident. And I think that when we look through the Southern Neighbourhood strategy, it really showcases the way in which we all share joint challenges and in which the region really needs to further enrich and deepen the dialogue between the partners, and the way in which the European Union has a very clear interest in tapping into that discussion and ensuring that its priorities are well understood and well translated into the national level, and to utilize its leadership in order to foster better relations between the different partners who together need to cooperate in a way to work on these joint challenges. Because when we speak of energy, when we speak of climate, when we speak also of defense and security, these are no longer phenomena that are happening in separate countries. These are all regional issues that require dialogue. And that is why, for us, it was very important to see the way in which the new approach, the Southern Neighbourhood, really connects to what, in our view, is the most important development in the region. Of course, it won't surprise you that as an Israeli, this year has been first and foremost been under the symbol of normalization and of expanding Israel's relations with new partners. And to see the European Union really taking on this development in such a strong way through the Southern Neighbourhood, basically, in a sense, it's really a connection in the most tangible way between localized developments, regional developments, and European and neighborhood relations. For us, that is very important because it really addresses the way in which the European Union approaches Israel. We have been very clear on the fact that normalization has brought along a change of paradigm for the region, for Israel and the Arab and the Muslim world. And we also see for it very positive implications for the European Union, both internally and from a regional perspective. And here, Europe really is able to strengthen its role in the region by tapping into these new developments. We're looking forward to further exploring what this will mean for our relations. We want to really get into the more operational elements and more concrete ideas. It was a pleasure to hear Michele already alluding to certain projects coming up. We want to see these also furthered through finally drafting a partnership priorities agreement between Israel and the EU, which is something that is very lacking in our relations. But really, what we've seen in the past year is just very exciting, I have to say, on a personal level, really exciting enthusiasm with which normalization has been received in Israel and in our new partners' countries. And it's really been embraced, and so many initiatives and ideas of cooperation are already happening. And these are going to take place with Europe or without Europe. And we want to see Europe, the European Union, and European member states as a very clear partner in this. And we think that this is something that ultimately serves a lot to embolden the European Union's relevance in the region, and its relevance also to Israel, both domestically and also in the context of Israeli-Palestinian relations. When there are such strong changes happening, you cannot ignore what is happening. You need to tap into that. And that is why, in our view, the Southern Neighborhood really allows the European Union to expand the conversation vis-a-vis Israel in the region. And by showing that the EU engages more broadly with Israel on topics that are of interest to Israel and to its partners, it will send a very important message also in terms of the type of relations that it's seeking. And I think that it will do a lot also to improve both the relations between Europeans and Israel, and also to improve the European Union's image in Israel, which is something that is also important and serves as a backdrop to the more political and economic relations that we hold. So I will stop here, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions and hearing your comments. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Noah. Now we'll turn to Dr. Maya Sion Tzidkiyahu. She's the co-president of the Israeli Association for Studies of European Integration, and she's the director of the program on Israel-European relations, also with the Mitvim Institute. And please, Maya, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Danny. And I wish to stress that I have multiple hats. So here in this event, I am speaking under my hat as the director of the Israeli-Europe program at Mitvim. And first, we all know from our own experience the importance of living in a good neighborhood. We all wish to live in a peaceful and flourishing area surrounded by friendly neighbors. And the same goes to countries and between countries. So the European Union is an inspiring example for turning bloodshed Europe into a peaceful, stable, flourishing political entity in which neighbors cooperate with one another. And since its foundation, the EU wished to export its model, first by enlargement, by joining other European countries as its members, and then 25 years ago, when the Oslo process began between Israelis and Palestinians, and a peace agreement was signed between Israel and Jordan, then the EU saw this as an opportunity to further export its model, turning a bloodshed southern Mediterranean region in which Israel was a focal point of wars and conflicts into a peaceful region. It began investing in the southern Mediterranean, aiming to foster stability and social economic development through the Barcelona process. Now, needless to elaborate, 25 years later, the region is less stable and the social economic challenges are even more immense, and the corona epidemic just made them even more challenging. So what opportunities does the renewed partnership offers to Israel and the region? What can be the implications for EU-Israeli relations? I want to focus more on this aspect of EU-Israeli relations. And then I identify the opportunities already raised here about the interregional, sub-regional, trilateral cooperation, and also between EU-Israeli relations. I have one political evaluation which puts a question mark on those issues, and I think Luigi touched upon something that I would relate to maybe afterwards. And then I have 4 recommendations to EU and to Israel. So first, the joint communication on the renewed partnership sets an opportunity for regional and interregional cooperation in light of those normalization agreements that Israel signed. And I quote from the document, "The EU will be ready to explore further regional, sub-regional, or trilateral cooperation and joint initiatives between partner countries across the board, including in light of the recent normalization of relations between Israel and a number of Arab countries. So this is a quote. And then with regards to inter-regional cooperation, the Gulf is mentioned specifically in the joint communication, and so is the Red Sea area. So hence the recommendation is that Israel and Arab countries it has relations with, and that relates also to Jordan and to Egypt and possibly perhaps even the Palestinian Authority, and obviously the United Arab Emirates and Morocco should decide together, bilaterally or together, what regional and inter-regional projects to suggest to the EU. And indeed, Michele, you gave one small example, but many projects can be envisaged under those goals that the EU set, be it an infrastructure to enhance economic relations or green and digital transition, climate change, etc. Now, the indirect opportunity is the improvement of EU-Israeli relations if the above process, this normalization process, would take place, this regional cooperation. So, however, the realization of this opportunity depends on whether the EU will apply conditionality here. And this relates to my second point, which is more a political observation, and that is the next government in Israel will not be able to advance the Middle East peace process. Now, be it a unity government between right-wing Naftali Bennett and left-wing Nitzan Horowitz, or be it another Netanyahu government, there is no political will or ability to do so in such formations of governments. However, the normalization agreements have potential to change the mindset and put the right infrastructure, regional infrastructure, to further resumption of the Middle East peace process. And I think this is the value that the EU grasps, and I will elaborate that in a minute. So, third, as I said, I have 4 recommendations to Israel and the EU. Recommendation A is that the next foreign minister of Israel should take advantage, obviously, of the options the renewed partnership presents. And in general, the foreign minister should adopt a positive and constructive position towards the EU, as Foreign Minister Ashkenazi have already made, and should visit Brussels and not only the capitals of the EU member state. And I think this is really important. Recommendation B is addressed to the European Union to renew the Association Council with Israel. The European Commission's joint communication speaks about the importance of dialogue. And I quote here again from the document, it proposes to strengthen significantly the political and policy dialogue across the Mediterranean, and I will elaborate on that in a minute. Now, such political improvement may lead to recommendation C, which, as Noah said, to sign partnership priorities with Israel, and again, I will elaborate on that. And then if recommendation C takes place of signing partnership priorities with Israel, then recommendation D can also take place, that Israel should evaluate whether it desires to start a negotiation on what's called a deep and comprehensive free trade area with the European Union, which is also a general options, which is mentioned in the joint communication. Morocco and Tunisia are having such negotiations. I think, Luigi, you referred to that. The EU-Israeli Association Agreement, signed already in 1995, is old. Trade agreements have changed considerably in the past 2-3 decades. From free trade area dealing with trading goods, the 2-3 decades afterwards, we see much more necessity to deal with services, with non-trade barriers, non-trade barriers, and investments, for example. Okay, so those are options to advance the relations, and I want to elaborate on those opportunities and recommendations. So, first, with regarding to the normalization agreements and regional and inter-regional cooperation, in the Commission joint communication, there is not much emphasis on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It is indeed mentioned, and the two-state solution is mentioned, but it's not stressed. And normalization agreements are mentioned in relations to those opportunities, as I said, those regional, inter-regional, and trilateral cooperation. And it's interesting to note that in a press conference, the commissioner of DG NEAR, dealing with the European neighbourhood policy, expressed the Commission's positive position on the normalization agreements as an opportunity the EU should enhance, and he said the following, and this sets the atmosphere within the EU. We see a major opportunity emerging with the Abraham agreements. We see that the normalization process has begun between Israel and Arab neighbors. We would like to help this process, also by front-loading some of the very tangible specific actions that can contribute to building confidence, trust through trade, economic cooperation, and through scientific cooperation between these countries. We value the peace this can create. If we are able to go back to the times and ideas of the Madrid conference, we would have much more opportunity to come to long-term solutions. And for the past decade, the Middle East peace process, as we all know, was stuck. Due to the linkage policy, no further upgrading of the EU-Israeli relations took place as long as the peace process did not advance. And to a great extent, EU-Israeli political relations, not just the economic or the functional technical ones, the political relations reflected that stalemate. The normalization agreements bring new hope for promoting some of the region towards more peace, economic development, and stability. And I hope this positive attitude expressed by the Commission will also convince the 27 foreign ministers of the EU to go ahead with such interregional cooperation as the renewed partnership aspires. And this can build the foundations for a renewal of the Middle East peace process in the future. So regarding the resumptions, very shortly, regarding the resumptions of the Israel-EU Association Council meetings, it is true that the relations between Israel and the EU can develop even without such high-level political dialogue, but renewal of the Association Council, which last took place in July 2012, can improve the relations and strengthen the political commitments. And also an EU-Israeli Association Council it's not a prize, right? It's a commitment the EU and Israel took upon themselves. And holding other association council and withholding that from Israel is imbalanced. So last point regarding signing of partnership priorities. Also in 2015, the EU conducted a review of the neighborhood policy, and it then proposed to neighbors to conclude those partnership priorities that Noah mentioned. And it's a document which will identify the priorities to advance bilaterally. Now, Israel started this process of, trying to figure out these partnership priorities, but then some member states' objection under the linkage policy put a stop to this process. And at the same time, the EU concluded such partnership priorities with Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon. But I want to stress one important point, that even if no partnership priority is signed between EU and Israel, on the positive side, the joint communication that the Commission published allows to develop such priorities on the basis of equivalent policy document. And in 2005, Israel signed an action plan with the EU, and this is an action plan, this is the old generation of the partnership priorities, so the action plan can serve as a basis to which we can further develop the relations. It's not updated, it's not an ideal document to work upon, but it is there, it's very elaborate, and it can form the basis to further develop the functional relations. So I thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Maya. I think you pointed out to some very interesting and pertinent points. I will now open the floor for question. I have already got one or two questions to start with, so I will ask Professor Tobias. You are the first one to ask the question, so please, if you can unmute yourself and make your comment, or actually the question that you have. Please, Professor Tobias.
Good morning, good afternoon. My two questions are the following. As Maya has reminded us, one of the items in the old action plan on which both the EU and Israel had put much hope is the discussions or negotiations towards free trade in services, because both sides are service economies. As far as I can read the new documents concerning this new approach of Euromed relations, I don't see anything reminding me the wish of the EU to work for the liberalization of trade in services, and that worries me a lot. Might I ask the speakers in Brussels to clarify for me if my fears are unfounded or not? That's my first question. The other one is that the phraseology used in the new document is borrowed in part from the phraseology being used in the Union for the Mediterranean. And in particular, we had our first speaker mentioned that co-ownership would be one of the leading principles of the new approach. Well, that was one of the reasons that the Union for the Mediterranean was created, because of a sense that the Southerners were not well represented. Now I have the impression that the EU, with its power of finance, is going to relegate even more to the side the Union for the Mediterranean, because in part it wants to take a leading role in co-ownership. So could you specify or clarify for me that I am again wrong? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tobias, for those two questions. So I suggest, because maybe that we'll ask our panelists very shortly to maybe respond, one on the service question and the other one on the distinction, if I can say, or the non-distinction between the UFM and the overall Southern policy. So maybe I will give the first floor to, we'll do the reverse side. So maybe we start with Maya, and then we move to Noah, to Luigi, and to Michele. So please, Maya.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you, Alfred, for your questions. I think actually the burden of answer is on Michele this time, but I support Alfred in what he's saying. I mean, the trade in services is much more important nowadays in the trade relations between the EU and Israel. During the past year, the trade in services became equivalent in size to the trade in goods between the EU and Israel. So the importance of liberalization in this field is definitely should be prioritized as long as it's in Israel's interest, and I think also obviously in the EU's interest. And with regard to the co-ownership, I would leave it to Michele to answer.
Noah, can you tell us something about the two questions?
I'd agree with Maya that Michele would probably be the best to respond, but I would just say in regards with the Union for the Mediterranean, it's possible, of course, to utilize similar concepts of successful cooperation, and co-ownership is definitely one of them, in parallel approaches and parallel programs. Union for the Mediterranean, of course, does not encompass exactly the Southern Neighborhood, and so we're looking at two different and separate geographical areas, although a lot of them do overlap. But I would not say that, at least in the way that we've approached the new renewed partnership for the Southern Neighborhood, we haven't seen it conflicting with the Union for the Mediterranean, and if anything, I think that it would be able to further strengthen the way in which the UFM's priorities are then pursued, with additional attention and resources being allocated for it from the side of the Commission, which is always a very good thing when you're looking at regional programming. But I'll stop here if that's okay, and I'll let Michele continue.
Yes, well, Luigi, quickly, maybe you can also invite us. Please, Luigi.
Just, yeah, very quickly, on the topic of deeper comprehensive free trade agreements, I mean, they do include a service element, a relatively substantial one, as far as free trade agreements go. And the EU is still trying to negotiate DCFTAs with several countries in the region. Whether Israel is also at some stage one of those, that's up to European leaders to decide. But it does have a service component, so that option is on the table.
And on the UFN?
I don't really have anything to add to what's been said on that, so I'll leave it to Michele.
Thank you. So, Michele, now all the eyes are on you. What can you say on the UFN and the services?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, of course, services are a growing component of trade today. And when trade is mentioned in the communication, I mean, it doesn't mean just trading goods. It means also trading services. And we say in the communication that there is an interest in modernizing trade and investment relation with the EU. This includes services for sure. With Israel, yes, it's true that the DCFTA for the time being, I mean, I mean, this option is not necessarily on the table yet. Is not under discussion, but still the agreement that we have with Israel also touches on services, and the bilateral exchange in services is growing a lot. So it's definitely something that is present in our discussion with Israel. Then on the UFM, the joint communication doesn't want to, or the new strategy doesn't want to replace the UFM, or want to accompany the UFM and this approach. The UFM is mentioned several times. And of course, we see this new strategy, this new approach as something reinforcing this regional approach, which in several sectors is proving quite useful.
Thank you. Well, we have two other questions, Gilad Segal and Muriel Osberg. So maybe Gilad, you'll be unmute and you can actually ask the question. And all those who are not speaking, please mute yourself. Thank you. So Gilad, please.
Thank you, Danny. It's been a long time since I've participated in one of the events of IASEI, and it's a pleasure. And maybe I have too many questions because of that, so please stop me if I exaggerate. So first of all, I would like to ask about, to refer a question to Michele. Michele, you've mentioned very briefly the normalization. So if you met the peace agreements with the Arab countries, then I would like to ask you to try to be a little bit more specific about specific programs where you see that the EU can play a positive role in the developments, in the regional developments, and you know, and also how would it affect EU's I'd say priorities in peacemaking. And second thing, also political, about the maybe to Luigi, who was talking about the enhancing democracy at the PA. How does the EU see this? You know, it's quite of a pickle here, which, you know, do we run elections? How exactly do we support the democracy? Which, you know, we might risk in having a EU designated terror entity winning the elections. So how does the EU plans to go about this? Maybe one more specific questions. I don't know if, I know it's not really exactly related to the topic today, but it's very, very important for EU-Israel relations. If you can, please mention one comment about the new framework program and how how do you see Israel's participation in it? Maybe in the view of the region, of the ENP and the Southern Neighbourhood. Thank you.
Thank you. By the way, I also saw that Morocco was mentioned in the paper as eventually being part of the horizon. So, but I'll keep my question for the end. Now we've got Muriel Osberg, please.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for organizing this very interesting debate. I would have a question on Israel-Arab normalization and what the EU can actually do in that context. And I have to say, I'm a bit reluctant to see so many opportunities, because most of the interests from Israel and Arab states that engage in normalization are actually very much linked to the US or they are direct bilateral interests in civil and security relations where the EU doesn't have a role to play. But I do see two fields, and I would like to get your reaction to that. And the one is on the green economy. I think there is a lot of room. And the second one is actually on conflict management and conflict transformation. And one idea that is specifically mentioned in the Abraham Accords is tourism and pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Now, what I'm thinking about is if the EU, together with Israel and Gulf states, could develop a scheme of investment in tourism and pilgrimage to Jerusalem for Muslims and Christians from the region, in a way that it would serve the local residents of East Jerusalem, that it would help maintain an Arab presence in East Jerusalem, and it would also help to preserve Arab culture and religion in East Jerusalem. And I think that could be one positive contribution to conflict transformation between Israel and its neighbors. And I'd like to hear what you think about that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. So, Michele, please, maybe you can bring more meat to the normalization and that the EU will bring on the table, please.
So on the question on programs where the EU could have a role in this normalization, this is actually the question. The same question is that I also have, because we are in this exploration phase. It is the same word that we used in the joint communication. So what are areas? What are areas where Israel can bring added value? I can also receive added value from the countries that are included in this normalization process. Then let's do not forget that there is already regional programs. So there is already a cooperation of Israel with other countries of the region, with Arab countries of the region in the context of EU programs. So this is a little bit also for Israel and the other partners, to show what, in their opinion, is really important to support. There are certain priorities at EU level. Of course, climate change is one, is maybe the most important, because it's affecting so hardly the region. Then also the financial tools that are at disposal of the EU, notably this and the IASEI, is more flexible than the instrument that have been there so far. So ideas can be supported in a more flexible way than before. So it did the time, to come with suggestions. And I'm afraid, I cannot maybe give a complete answer to this question. Then on, shall I reply to?
Go ahead with the others, the other questions.
Yes, on election, of course, the EU supports the process, the electoral process in Palestine, which has been suspended. There has been a statement by the High Representative on the fact that they're quite disappointed that this is not going on. How it would react if a terrorist organization would come to government? I cannot speculate on that. This is a very delicate issue. Of course, the EU expects any Palestinian authority to abide by certain rules. So to acknowledge Israel, to abide by the agreements that have been concluded so far, to renounce violence. But I cannot say more than that at this point in time. Then the Horizon Europe program is extremely important for the EU and extremely important for Israel. Israel has been one of the champions of the Horizon 2020, and I think is very much determined in being still involved in this one very thoroughly, and then maybe Noah will add on that. But this is definitely a great priority for Israel. What Muriel said, I mean, this idea on tourism for conflict management, conflict transformation is already one of, I mean, very good idea that they noted down, and that let's see if this can develop into something concrete. And then on green economy, definitely this is something that is very important in the EU, but we also receive in our bilateral dialogue with Israel a lot of interest in this concept, in the concept of circular economy as well. And this is something where the technology of Israel could be very useful in fostering also this kind of approach in other countries in the region. So that's it. I would leave.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Luigi. Maybe you can address and give your point of view.
Yeah. Well, on if Hamas had won the election, obviously the EU would have been in a very bad position. I think everyone was saying that wouldn't. In terms of funding, I mean, the EU is a very important funder for the PA. So there's things that it can do in terms of, I think, conditionality to try to incentivize some kind of reform, perhaps to reduce corruption at the margins, and to make sure that the PA, of course, it's not going to happen overnight, but to reduce, if possible, payments to martyrs. But the EU's role may be overestimated in this. I think it's going to be at the margins, and in a sense, that of the PA is one example of that stability democracy dilemma that I spoke of. The EU has been supporting the PA a lot because it's worried about what will happen if it were no longer there. On the question of normalization, I agree that the EU's incentives we perhaps tend to overestimate them, and the EU might not have a huge role. The idea of tourism in East Jerusalem, I agree, is a good one. On the Green Deal, I would just say that while it might be an area of cooperation, maybe we overestimate how much cooperation is possible. So one of the key elements of the Green Deal will be a border carbon adjustment mechanism, which will mean taxing imports into the EU that have a higher that are not taxed at source. So unless countries have a mechanism in place that is equivalent to that of the EU, then that could introduce a new trade barrier. And the EU is in discussions with the US to make sure that its system is compatible. But in terms of how this will affect countries in the region, the impact will be different country by country, but it's something to, I think, bear in mind when we talk about green issues.
Thank you. Noah.
First of all, I hope that if anyone in the audience is joining us from Jerusalem, that you were all able to find a safe place to shelter as rockets are launched from Gaza to central Israel and to Jerusalem, and we hope for safety for all people there. Now, regarding the questions that were asked, I think that there is a lot of potential in terms of concrete projects, and I think that the fact that in certain areas the EU was not a strong participant, as Muriel said, and these were areas that were more strongly dominated, let's say, by U.S. partnership, doesn't mean that that the potential is not there for new cooperation. And when we look at the list, I mean, there's so much that can provide the basis for cooperation. Of course, from people-to-people projects that Michele alluded to beforehand, but all, they really run the entire gamut from climate. I would particularly mark desertification and water management. These are very clear areas in which Israel has a lot to share with its neighbors. And truly, Israel is already sharing a lot with its neighbors and with its regional partners. But with the EU's help, I think that we would be able to take this to a wider place, but also to contextualize it within a new political dialogue with countries in the region. So if we're looking at projects that are already happening, in the private sector, business to business, we can turn into business to government. We can turn it into government to government. And these things in the end become political capital that allow also to further goals from a political nature in the region. And that's where the EU needs to understand really the potential of normalization and how it can utilize it to further both its own priorities and also its political priorities in the region. So, when we look even at areas outside of the Southern Neighborhood, perhaps Central Africa, that is dealing with a very, very very challenging obstacles in the field of water that create a destabilizing effect, but then affect also the political stability and perhaps even, relations, the way in which migration flows go into Europe. These things could potentially be addressed with Israeli, EU, cooperation with other countries in the region towards a fourth area. I mean, really, you have to be as creative as possible in the way in which you utilize this new paradigm to further advance your own goals as Europe and, our regional goals as Israel within the Southern Neighborhood. So that's really just a quick example, but we can talk about medical cooperation specifically, in the context of COVID-19, training of medical staff, dealing with pandemics, dealing with emergencies, SMEs, working on women business empowerment, financial schemes for improving, from poverty to ownership to entrepreneurship. Really, we can go anywhere we want with this. The idea is truly to try and see what every partner can bring to the table and how we can join those together in order to also advance European priorities in the region. So, it's true that at times when there's too many options, it's difficult to choose. But I think that we're facing a very good problem right now, and we just need to put some things on the board and to get talking. Of course, we require also a political framework in which we can discuss these things, and that's something that, as we said, Israel and the EU, unfortunately, need to do some work on to further explore these ideas.
Thank you, Noah. Can we have Maya, please? Can you address those questions?
Yeah, thank you,
Maya,
Noah.
please.
Thanks, Danny. Noah, this was really inspiring. You gave a lot of examples, and I think it's really the imagination and creativity is the strong side of Israelis. So each and every one of us can contribute something, and this is a point that I want to stress. Actually, the EU looks at the southern region as a region that the EU can contribute to the region, but Israel is very different from the other countries in the region, and actually Israel can contribute to those countries. So, for example, Israel enjoys very much the twinning and TAIEX projects, but Israel can also give TAIEX projects to its neighbors. So why not open it to a more co-ownership in that sense? And also send Israeli experts via the EU mechanism of TAIEX, for example, to Arab countries, obviously the ones that Israel have relations with. Now, it was mentioned that Israel can very much contribute to the digital transformation or transition of those countries, to training, to projects, infrastructure, business. Men and women in Israel can start investing in those countries with the help of this program, because as was mentioned, I'm not sure if it was Luigi or Michele that were mentioning it, but the EU is going to is putting 7 billion euros on this program, but it wants to have 30 other billion euros invested by financial institutions such as the European Investment Bank, such as the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and the IMF and other institutions, and by private investors. So this is also an opportunity for Israeli private investors and Arab private investors, and we see it happening already between the UAE and Israel, for example. Israel can definitely contribute on agriculture, on water issues, on solar energy, and that's not only the government. It's also, as Noah was mentioning, the business sector and the innovation, the high-tech sector in Israel. In the program itself of the communication of the Commission, in the joint communication, there was a mentioning of the Allenby bridge crossing between Israel and Jordan. So also some projects can be made there. Erasmus program can be opened also to students coming from the region to other countries in the region. Horizon was mentioned here. Muriel, to your question about tourism, I think that government to government, I don't see how government to government agreements on tourism can put emphasis on developing East Jerusalem. I do see it by private investors, and that can be done. But government to government, it's hard to see how you can do that. Maybe it should be examined. And I join what Luigi was saying about the elections in the Palestinian Authority. That definitely puts a question mark on democratization processes vis-a-vis stability. And we've seen that taking place with the Hamas in 2006, coming to power. That didn't do any good to the Middle East peace process or to the Palestinian themselves. So those processes are, as was mentioned, extremely delicate, and Israel shouldn't be involved in that. But the EU does wish to take a role in some of the processes. So, we can hope for the best, but maybe not be negligent on this issue. I think I'll stop here.
Well, thank you, Maya. Well, I'll take the liberty of being the moderator to add and also some questions. I think that Maya made a point which I would like, especially Michele and maybe even Noah, to look upon it. Unfortunately, when I read the documentation, it all looks very familiar, and there is no fresh thinking of changing the whole architecture. You are still looking at Europe and its sphere of influence that you want to enlarge. I think we are out of that, and I'm sorry, I'm not very diplomatic nowadays, and especially the normalization with the Gulf country is totally changing the situation, and I don't see it enough in your thinking, because you continue to try to extend your norms to the Mediterranean, and we have been trying to do that for the last 25 years. Not very successfully, by the way, but because of many reasons. I'm not blaming the European. I think that there are problems on the north, on the south, but maybe we should change the whole approach of trying to change something. I'm just thinking, and again, I'll let my imagination go wild. I mean, there were talks about a new community of water and energy, okay, and climate change. Who knows? I mean, the region here has a problem, a major problem, in terms of water, in terms of energy, renewable energy connected to the green. Why not to talk in totally two different terms, okay, of creating different structure, okay, of bringing you talk about the intra-trade in the south is still very low, and still we are looking at the center and the periphery. We should change all that, and you don't address enough all the question of a South-South type of cooperation, how Europe can do something about it, because this is a major problem, and not to continue this center-periphery type of relation. By the way, I don't see neither any reference to external power that are coming, which are either threatening or maybe can be a chance to the region. China is present in the Mediterranean, and I don't see any reference to how to either join forces vis-a-vis third party or on contrary, maybe do something together and bring the Chinese in some positive way. So again, those are the type of wild questions that I would like to have reference to, because I think that it's lacking, and really what is lacking is a new thinking, a new way of looking at the region, and most of it, I just put Israel in the three communication, the name Israel. It appears, I think, 3 times. That's it. Okay, so we are really not part of that type of dialogue, because we are an OECD country, and what actually Maya just said about bringing Israel on the European side, we already talked about it many years ago, about we not being a southern partner, but we are a bit different. So I know it's very difficult to make differentiation and to treat everybody differently, etc. But look, I mean, we have 25 years of experience, and should we try maybe something else? Sorry for being a bit blunt, but please, Michele.
Yes. Thank you for all these points, which are very interesting for sure. I see the joint communication, I mean, as a partnership, meaning as an attempt to bring cooperation and dialogue to, let's say, a different level, to a more modern level, with tools that are a little bit more flexible, with more opportunities for dialogue and co-ownership. Yes, this is the right word. Of course, maybe there was I mean, it would be good to be able and as bold as it gets to think of something completely new. Maybe there was an attempt to be also, yes, ambitious, but also realistic on what it can be done in the next coming years. There are some points that are very interesting in what you said. For example, yes, the role of external actors as China. I mean, the role of China is very much important in the region and in Europe as well. This communication will be subject also to a review. It's a kind of a review mechanism. I think that the first review will happen, I think, in 2024. But in any case, it's something open to be discussed, open to be improved, and is not something fixed in stone. But I think it's something that gives also the political support to upshift the gear, to change gear. Let's see if a few years down the line it will bring to something completely new. I will leave. I mean, we are a little bit at the end, so I leave also the floor to others. I see there are other hands raised. Maybe more questions.
I understand a lot of what you said, and I think that there's, for all EU watchers, at times there's a bit of a frustration of the pace of change in the European institutions, but ultimately I think that that's an inherent quality of such a huge machinery. And, you know, we need to appreciate the small steps with which things and new ideas and new objectives are launched. I referred in the beginning of my remarks to the fact that prior to the publication of the renewed partnership, there was a lot of effort placed on dialogue with the partner countries by High Representative Borrell and Commissioner Verhelyi. And I think that was, you know, that was an interesting way to explore this partnership, making it from, you know, a center to periphery to a joint effort, and to really hearing the partner countries in order to bring their challenges and their ideas for projects that they would want to advance into the communication, into the investment plan. But as you correctly said, you know, Israel is not really there. And ultimately that's because of the very unique role and very unique nature of Israel within the neighborhood. And so, you know, what we're looking for from Europe doesn't take the form of investment, but looks more to the form of opportunity. And that's what we're hoping that this neighborhood you know, approach will deliver for us. So opening of doors and not financing.
Thank you. I see that there is Jarif has got a question. I don't see you, but yes. Jarif, can you please?
No, you don't see me. Hi, you don't see
yes.
me. I'm a proud Moroccan with Jewish heritage, so I'm in here as well as also for the Morocco World News. I write articles for it. I'm living in Europe, by the way. But I just wanted to say that I totally agree with you, Mr. Katavaris, because I do think we need a total different dynamic and a total different view on how to cooperate with each other. And it's not like we do not need Europe, but it's not like you need it, because I do think that the Arab countries, even though in my view, Morocco is not really an Arab country because it's on the complete west side of North Africa. It's an African country with a strong Jewish heritage and also with of course, an Arab culture and being Muslim. But I really do think it's more an equal opportunity what Israel can bring to the other countries, because they have a real sense of what they need also to have a better relations with their neighbors. And also, I do believe that Israel can understands culture-wise also better these countries as well. And I do believe that Europe, perhaps I'm a bit younger than everyone, but I do believe Europe is from, well, let's say the 20th century view, and it's also infrastructure and structurized in that way that they like to tell you what to do. I don't say it's a fact, of course. I mean, it's wider than that. It is broader than that. But I would like really to see a mobilization of the Arab nations with Israel, because they, well, yeah, it sounds naive. Well, let me be an idealist, but we all are connected actually with each other, and we need to move forward. I do believe Israel can contribute, and they have an equal partnership with each other, because there is something to gain for both sides. Israel needs something from the Arabs and vice versa. They need something from them. So it's more an equal based what they can contribute and deliver for each other. And also security-wise, Morocco, there is no war between Israel and Morocco, never has been. Also, I need to be corrected because my family lives in Israel and in Morocco. There is no war, there has never been a war. So they actually continue their relations. Therefore, actually, they already had always relations, even though on the background informal. So I salute actually every cooperation with because also if you talk about the backside from the terrible what is happening now in Israel, in Jerusalem, I do believe if they are more engaged with each other, perhaps the Palestinian conflict will resolve. But they need to cooperate.
Thank you, Jerry. Okay, thank you. Well, I think that we are reaching almost the end. I think that well, I mean, we have one more minute to go, but I see here that there is a follow-up on my comment for Mr. Sobol. So I don't want to look as if I don't say give people the reaction. So maybe Mr. Sobol, you want to say very quickly your remark, please.
Yeah. Hi everyone. Many thanks for the presentations. Greetings from Taipei. Just quick follow-up. In 2003, when the Wider Europe was introduced, already then, a couple of weeks afterwards, policy analysts thought that that's an unrealistic document. And then we had the Treaty of Lisbon, the European External Action Service. We are in 2021. It was supposed to be much more of a geostrategic output. Nothing's there. The same old contradiction between security and democratization, the same technical aspirations without understanding the geopolitical environment. Where are we going to go from here? Because as you've mentioned, and as many others did, there is no change. Like, do we see who held the pen? The European Commission officials or the European External Action officials when they actually wrote the new communication? Is there a conflict or bureaucratic conflict between the two institutions that are supposed to guide European Union foreign policy? Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think that we will leave, unless Luigi or Maya, you still want to say something? Or if not, so I will try to, I mean, we cannot sum up all what has been said here, but I think that we are definitely engaged, and probably we take the challenge of Michele that we have a time of thinking, of reflection in which we can bring ideas. So I think that we definitely should do that, especially also the private sector or the civil society. It's not enough just to talk about government, especially in Israel when you don't have governments. So it's better to speak to the civil society, but hopefully we'll have one soon. But I definitely think that, yes, I mean, the region is important. The region is changing. The architecture of the region is changing. Therefore, we should adapt to that, both the Israelis, the Arabs, and the Europeans. So on that note, I thank you very much again for joining us. I thank Mitvim, I thank the Association for European Integration, the Friedrich Stiftung, and obviously the Chamber of Commerce, which, by the way, will probably have also next time a type of meeting. This time we're trying to invite the ambassadors of the neighboring countries that have relation with Israel, i.e. Morocco, Jordan, Egypt, and maybe the Emiratis and Bahrain, to say what they think about that. So we hope to have such an occasion, because now we can gather everybody in Israel, which is something unbelievable and unthinkable few months ago. So thank you again, and I hope that Jerusalem is quiet after the siren were there, and we all hope for a quiet weekend. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, Danny, and to all the participants.
Thank you.